It's a very hot day at Boca Chica, and there's absolutely no wind, so the bugs are out on the island, and it's a good day to go and explore someplace away from this island. I have to thank Roger Fontaine for telling me about this other island. It's Ragged Key number 1. The Ragged Keys are a series of 5 islands just north of Boca Chica. And number 5 is the island immediately north of Boca Chica where all the birds come to roost at night. I was promised gin clear water because Ragged Key number 1 is at the north end of the Ragged Keys and the most open to the ocean of any of these northern Florida keys that are here in Biscayne Bay. With it being so open to the ocean, the water flushes quite a bit more than it does here at Boca Chica. So on an incoming tide, Ragged Key number 1 is pretty much surrounded by normal ocean water. Here I am pushing the boat off the dock. Roger Fontaine has a YouTube channel called Roger Funtan. Fun as in fun, and tan like suntan. You should check it out sometime. Backing away from the dock before pulling out of the harbor. You can see how still the water is because there's just absolutely no wind today. On days with some wind, there really isn't much in the way of bugs on Boca Chica, but today with no wind, the mosquitoes are about, and this is just a good day to go and explore someplace else with the boat. I had my chart plotter turned on because I was told the chart plotter would show me a deep water channel between the end of the channel to Boca Chica and the beach at Ragged Key number 1. Look at how green the water is here. Now I'm driving away from Boca Chica and I will pass a series of 3 of these channel marker buoys like the one going by on the left right now. Here's the second channel marker buoy and the third and outer channel marker buoy where I make my turn. I'm now leaving the marked channel to Boca Chica and I'm going to head straight for the beach on Ragged Key number 1. And the chart plotter, although it isn't picked up very well on the camera here, is showing a clear deep water channel all the way to just adjacent to Ragged Key number 1. In spite of this, I'm slowing down a little bit because I've never been this way and I don't really know what I might encounter. There's always the theory that it's better to run into something at 3 miles an hour than at 6. Here's a view of the other Ragged Keys. It's just amazing how glassy smooth the water is today. Every summer there are a few days like this, but they're very rare. This would have been an excellent day to drive across to Bimini. I'm getting the anchor ready to drop. Normally it's held in place by a pin that goes through the chain, so it's not hanging on the windlass all the time. Just look at that water. I mean, with no ripples, you can see everything on the bottom. And now I can drive closer to the island before dropping the anchor. And here we are. There's a bit of a current flowing in now, so I've turned the boat to face the current and I'm dropping the anchor. Again, just look how clear that water is. Amazing. So now I'll tie off the anchor. Have another look to make sure it's set. And again, marvel at the crystal clear water and the lack of any ripples or anything. Now that the boat is safely at anchor, I take some video of the city of Miami on the horizon. And I'm looking across at South Beach now. Soldier Key is partway between Key Biscayne and the Ragged Keys. And here is Ragged Key number 1. There's the remains of a dock, just the posts really, and the remains of a seawall surrounding the island. There's some exposed rock at the south end of Ragged Key number 1, and way off in the distance is this lighthouse on the reef. This is Ragged Key number 2, and there's just a little bit of it left poking up above water. Ragged Key number 3 has this house on it. It was privately owned before the Park Service acquired this part of Biscayne Bay, so these people actually have a house inside the boundaries of the national park. I briefly turn on the lights to make sure that the winch has power to it. They're both on the same circuit, so if these lights on the back deck work, so will the winch for the dinghy. That boogie board is there. It goes with the dinghy because I have a hard time climbing into the dinghy if it's in the water, in deep water, but I can always climb onto the boogie board and from there into the dinghy. So it's basically a boogie board and a ladder to get in and out of the dinghy with. I have to watch this cable as it starts to become slack. I keep tension on it as I pay out a little bit more cable. so that it doesn't get all squirrely around the drum, which can be a real pain in the butt to clear up. The dinghy was caught underneath the dive platform a little bit, but I've got it mostly clear now. My dinghy is an Oliver boat, and I cut a hole and put that deck hatch in the front, and it makes a nice storage space for stuff like the anchor and some battery-powered running lights, the dive flag, and other stuff that generally goes with the dinghy. Now that it's tied off to the boat, I can get it completely released from the dive platform. I tried on a different day and couldn't get the dinghy motor to start, so I'm going to paddle today. On a day like this with no wind, paddling is pretty easy. There's the remains of the dock. The dock pilings are like small steel I-beams driven into the bottom. If somebody wanted to make use of this island, the dock could be rebuilt using the existing pilings. It's hard to get permits to put in new pilings or seawalls or anything now that this is the national park, but I believe this island is still privately owned. And I now claim this land for Spain. I don't really think you can get away with that anymore. So this big beach area is kind of the center of the island. And right about here is the narrowest part of the island, where this beach extends almost to the other side of the island. You can see where the weeds wash up at high tide. And at high tide, there's just that little bit that's dry. This part here is wet a bit at high tide. There's some holes under the seawall where water can go in and out here. And the seawall makes this angle here at the narrowest part of the island. This pretty much divides the island into two main lobes, a north and a south lobe. And now I'm traveling south along the seawall. Just look at how amazingly clear that water is. It's really not even deep enough to lay down in and snorkel, but there's, I don't know if the video picks it up, there's quite a few very small aquarium-sized fish right here in the shallows. And here's that rocky area to the south of the island. This is very jagged and sharp. It's actually called Biscayne Pinnacle. And most of the bottom of the bay is like this, but in most places it's covered with 2 or 3 feet of muck that has a bit of sand and turtle grass growing on top of that. It's very sharp and jagged, and you definitely wouldn't want to get your boat on any of this. So walking along the south seawall to the southwest corner of the island. Again, stopping to admire the crystal clear water and little aquarium-sized fish everywhere in amongst this pinnacle stuff. So now walking along the southwest seawall. There's almost like little paths worn in the island. And I'm kind of surprised to see that. I wouldn't expect this island gets that many visitors, although it is very close to the city of Miami, so I guess people do come out here and camp a lot of weekends and stuff. I suppose this is a place if you really don't like the crowds at Boca Chita on the weekends. So back at the narrow part of the island, that bend in the east seawall, where I had started my walk along the seawall, now I'm going the other way, walking north along the east seawall. And here are the remains of some pilings that supported something, and some concrete steps on the ocean side of the island. I'm being very careful how I walk here because this pinnacle is very sharp. Just slipping and falling down here could cause serious injuries. It's just an amazing landscape, though. Not many places in Florida where you see anything like this. Back up the steps onto the seawall and continuing to the north. This is the northeast corner of the island, and there are some rocks at the north end of the island as well. Not so much as the south end, but there's some here. And this is the northwest corner of the island. It's just amazing how glass-calm Biscayne Bay is today. There's a little bit of sand along this part of the seawall here. It seems to be a little bit finer than the sand at the beach where the boat is. And this is the remains of somebody's tent. It's collapsed and has been in the rain and the weather for a while, but it's still very recognizable as somebody's camp. Here is their camp chair. And what looks at first like a cemetery is actually a series of concrete pilings driven into the ground in sort of a regular square grid. These apparently supported a wooden house that was built up off of the ground to prevent the wood from rotting in the rainy season. A little palm tree starting there, and over here is the remains of some sort of concrete building. I'm not sure if it was a little house or a generator house or what, but it had concrete walls. It's just amazing how completely destroyed it is, though. This concrete wall is broken. Another palm tree there. But yeah, the broken wall is pushed over some. A lot of time has passed since this was occupied, but apparently hurricanes did much of the damage here. It's just amazing the destructive power of these storms. Here I checked to see how easy it is to dig in the sand at this beach. It's pretty coarse and difficult digging, so I guess the gag with the plastic skeleton is going to have to wait for a different beach where it's a bit easier to dig. And that's it. A very small island, and you have now seen pretty much most of it. I would like to come back here and go snorkeling sometime. The water is much cleaner than most other places I've been in Biscayne Bay. And there seems to be a lot of small fish and stuff around the island. I had meant to take Mimi here the next weekend, but the weather kind of changed those plans. It's something to look forward to next time I come back this way. I was hoping that I could just shove off and paddle away from the island, but I guess the tide is still going out a little bit, and with my weight in the dinghy, it's on the bottom, so I have to get out, or at least get much of my weight out of the dinghy before it will lift off the bottom and I can move away from the island. Once again, back past the remains of the dock, and just amazing how calm the bay is today. Now I can clip the dinghy onto the winch, which will haul it aboard the boat in a few minutes. Never did need the oar locks. The boogie board can kind of get wedged in there. It's just the right size to wedge in there on the seats, and it'll stay in place when I lift the dinghy out of the water. Once again, I'm guiding the cable onto the spool. I've had the cable wind off the side of the spool once before because there's no fair lead on this winch. And that's a real pain because you have to take the winch off and partially disassemble it to get the cable back on the spool. So I try to remember to guide it onto the spool every time I use it now. That's a lot easier than fixing it once it gets off of the spool. And the dinghy rests in the little dinghy holders that I made as one of my first Nidacor and fiberglass projects. And these little clips hold it on the back of the boat.